Hello and welcome to another episode of Rowdy Reveals. I'm Diane Yee, Director of Campus Recreation at MSU Denver, here to share some guidelines for effective cover letters and resumes. I noticed that a lot of people have been manually justifying dates to the right, so I wanted to start off by showing you an easy tool in Microsoft Word that can help you do this perfectly every time. So before I go over my guidelines, I wanted to show you that tool. And so that you could see it better, I'll toggle the ShowHide Tool on. And you could see all of these spaces that are pushing the date to the right. Some of you might do that, and some of you might use tabs followed by spaces. Well, you really don't need to do either. What you would do is highlight these and replace it with a single tab. Then you want to make sure your rulers are on so that you can see this arrow up here. And you're going to click until you see the arrow that starts on the right and goes to the left. You come up to your top ruler, click towards the end, but not this node over here. And you want to drop this arrow and drag it to where you want that text to go. So in this case, the end of the line. And when you release, you'll see that the text goes right to the end of where you wanted it. And if you want to type in more text, you'll see that it'll push to the left. And you would simply just do that again here. So remove all these. You could leave that one tab. You could see that in that little arrow there, and drop and drag the arrow at the top. Another cool feature on Word is this paintbrush tool. So instead of having to do that every time, you would simply identify this is the line you want to replicate, double click this paintbrush, and then go down to your next section, which you'll see I had set up here. And you want to just click on each line you want to add that same arrow to. And you can see at the top the arrow is now on these lines and the dates are pushed over to the end, nicely justified there. And you do want to make sure that your fonts are the same size. So if you see that 2005 is a little bit smaller, you just want to see that that's a font size 12. This is a font size 11. So you could either change it here and change that, or you could simply, again, paintbrush that. So click this font, click the paintbrush tool, and paint what you want to replicate. And there you have it. So when you go back up to the top of the page, I want to show you one more feature about those justifying arrows. So it doesn't need to be just right justified. You could see here, I have the left justified arrows up. So on these three lines, you could see that there are 3 arrows per line, and that makes my columns. I could obviously use the columns feature, but in that feature, each column is the same width, and with this, obviously the third column being a shorter text than the others, I didn't want that to be the case, so I used the left arrow. You could also use a center arrow, so if you toggle up here again to the up arrow, instead of having the lines all flush to the left, you can remove this one and add the center arrow, and you can see how it's centered wherever you drop that center tab. So great little feature there. Great. Now I want to go into the guidelines of how I write my resumes. And obviously these are guidelines, these aren't hard facts, so you could take it with a grain of salt. So the top section, let me remove these. The top section is your header, obviously. Your name is the most important thing, so it should be featured. And then you want to include your email, phone, and LinkedIn profile. I highly recommend creating a LinkedIn profile and including it here, as it is your live resume. If you have any updates between printing the hard copy and going to your interview, you could always reference your LinkedIn resume. And it's also a place where you could add more things than are present on a paper resume, such as articles you want to hyperlink, maybe some photos or artwork, things like that. So LinkedIn is a great thing to have listed on your resume. You could also include your city and state. Some employers are interested in where you currently live in case you need to relocate for the position, but I highly recommend that you do not include your street address, as you don't want people to know where you live. The employers will get that information if they need it in other ways. So you don't want that circulating out there in case your resume gets passed around. The next section that I have is a skills summary. This is a great section here to include the requirements that the job is asking for. So it really showcases the skills that you already have. In terms of placement on your resume, I put it at the top of the page just for spacing and editing purposes, but you're more than welcome to include this section towards the bottom and lead with either your education or your experience. And I'll talk about education later. So the next section I have is my experience. You want to go in reverse chronological order, which means you're going to start with your current job or your most recent job and work your way backwards. You want to make sure that the bullets under your experience are relevant facts and figures and less about the obvious job duties. For example, if you were a front desk attendant, which we have a lot of those in campus recreation, you don't necessarily need to say that you've answered phones because that's a given in the job title. You want to say how you improve the office and the department and the culture while in that position. So you might not be making high-level decisions as a front desk attendant, but you are making an impact, and you want to talk about how you're doing that in your resume bullets. You also want to think outside the box. So in my case, this bottom bullet here, I talk about collaboration with other departments. So you don't want to just be so insular and talking about what you did on the day-to-day within recreation. You want to talk about the larger scope. You know, I have a lot of meetings with other departments, and we collaborate on events and programming and things like that. So you definitely want to mention those things in your resume. You could also list job experiences without bullets. So if it's, you know, farther back in your career and a little bit more obvious or rudimentary, you don't need to list bullets there. So in this case, with Villanova, my assistant coordinator position, I didn't feel the need to list the bullets, but it was kind of important to list the fact that that's where I started from. After education, or after experience rather, I talk about education. And here again, you want to be in reverse chronological order, listing the most recent first. And if you have more than one degree, feel free to omit your high school information. But if you simply have an associate's or a bachelor's, then feel free to include your high school information so that it's, you know, two things in this section. When you talk about your college degrees, you do want to list the year that you graduated. If it was a recent graduation, potentially even include the month. That way it's similar to the dates that you have up here. Also, now with people graduating in the fall and summer, it might be useful for the employer to know how long ago you graduated. You could also include your GPA if it's over a 3.0, and any awards, honors, and relevant coursework that you might think the employer is interested in. I finished up my resume with a technology section. Obviously, this is optional based on the job you're applying to, as well as an affiliations section. I like to put any volunteer work here, any organizations you're part of, especially if it's related to the job, potentially, you know, the official associations that the employer is connected to as well. So that wraps up my resume. I kept it to 2 pages. If you have enough relevant experience to put into your resume, then obviously you can keep it at 2 pages. But if you have limited work experience, potentially try to push that onto 1 page. And if you do have a second page or subsequent pages, make sure your name is on all of them in case they get separated when it's printed by the employers. Then I'm going to talk about cover letter, which is obviously before your resume. And again, I use the same header. If you have a third document, perhaps a references page, make sure you're consistent throughout so it looks like you wrote all your documents in one sitting. So I use the same header up here, followed by the address of the employer, the date that you submit your application. You don't want to choose a future date because that's weird. And you don't want to put a date that you potentially started this letter in case, you know, it was a couple of weeks ago. So you always want to put the date that you submitted the application. And if I zoom out here, you can see that it really takes up a full page. And a lot of it is really just the address, the salutation, and my signature. So you see, in terms of writing, it's really just for capable paragraphs, so something that anyone could write. And this is kind of the formatting that I've followed. So the first paragraph should include the job title, how you found the job posting, and a quick reason why you want the job and why you'd be a good fit. In my case, I included where I found the job and the job title above my salutation, but you could also put it in that first paragraph. Oh, and also, as far as who you're addressing, if you don't know who your supervisor will be or the head of the search committee will be, you could say, Dear search chair or search committee or hiring manager. But make sure that you're not writing to whom it may concern. That's a little bit outdated and impersonal. Okay, moving on. So second and third paragraphs are very similar in nature. In my case, I did for my second paragraph my past experiences and how it could directly be related to the skills and qualities that the employer is looking for. And then my third paragraph, I talked about how you can contribute to the company and position and make them better. If you're applying to an internship, let's say, you might have the option of talking about how this position will really launch your career. But if it's not an internship where it's positioned to really get you ready for the next steps, you want to focus the letter on how you could help the company versus how the company could help you. And then that fourth and final paragraph is your closing. You want to summarize a little from each paragraph above without repeating yourself, of course, and thanking them for their time and consideration. You might also want to throw a line in there about how you look forward to speaking with them, potentially about your skills or qualifications. That shows your willingness to go to the next step. And then finally, add your signature. And if you can't sign it directly or drop in your signature, I would still put a space in there and then use a script font for your signature. So you would list your name twice. Well, that wraps up my tips and guidelines for a cover letter and resume writing. Well, thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed these pointers and other episodes of Rowdy Reveals.